I am Danny, also known as the Pavement Poet. You will typically find me travelling around from town to town, writing my poetry on the pavements, in streets, up and down the UK and Europe. This is the Pavement Poets podcast. So probably the most often asked question is, what inspires me? All in, there's probably many things that have made that inspirational kind of contribution over the years, as it were. But if I had to really get down to it, I'd probably say it's those quiet, rainy autumn days when I take the time really to get lost in the middle of nature. Those who have ever spent a great amount of time outdoors will be aware that the silence, the lack of distractions, the time taken just to smash that clock and get lost can at times be the things which bring us the most peace, most inspiration in life. And it's one of those things that moves on and on and on. For me, there's numerous places. I like the Wye Valley, but the poem coming up now, which I'll share with you in a moment, is probably most inspired by, I'll just describe it, shall we say, a lonely valley that has a river by the name of the Ifon, River Ifon, call it what you will, flowing through it. It's a tributary of the Wye, and like a lot of the Wye's tributaries, it kind of snakes its way down from a mid-Welsh high point. It's in this specific valley that the following poem was inspired by. I turned up with some friends of mine to visit another friend who lives alone in this valley. And whilst out walking, we stumbled upon, shall we say, some mushrooms which fell their way into someone's pot of tea. But the end conclusion was probably an altered state of mind what did it. But without going into too much detail, that brings us on to this poem, which I hope tells you a little bit more about what it is I am trying to say in this moment. It's the rain, it falls at the chosen hour, and the fungi grows in the valley's shelter. From sunshine lost in cloudy skies, the mind turns on to come say hi. As the Ifon flows where the poet ponders the mass of moments leading yonder to where the fungi grows in sheets amongst the shades of brown and green. As time it flows like a long-lost concept to those tuned in to meet the moment that veils lift and spirit glides through crystal glass, the open eye. As the earth stands carved by a long-gone winter which comes again to blow its weather, I sit there in amongst wet turf and feel my spirit start to burst. Out there into that crystal night, my body warm as flames subside, this form alive with second sight as life awakens in these eyes. The fungi grows at the chosen hour, and these feet once more they drift and wander. I ask myself once more of life, turned on, tuned in with open eyes. So with nature being a bit of a theme of this podcast, it's probably, I don't know, the next poem was inspired during a walk through Wiltshire one day, down towards Avebury. It was the end of spring. Solstice wasn't quite there, but I was sort of walking my way in the direction of Avebury with the memory running through my mind of the number of times I'd walked that route on my way to celebrate the summer solstice by the stones at Avebury. And on this particular day, it was battering with rain. It was battering down with rain. It's battering down with wind, and there was this one quiet moment up on Fivefield Down. I say quiet because there was nobody else about, but the wind was blowing, the rain was pouring, and I've put my bag on the ground. I've sat down on my bag, and by this point, I'm just this weather-blown vibration, and I've just kind of got onto Fivefield Down, and I've just got the walk down into Avebury itself with Hackpen Hill in the distance, but I'm feeling like I'd like a cigarette, so I sit down on my bag and quickly realise that I'm not going to have much luck rolling a cigarette in the wet weather. So I'm kind of hunched over. I've got my cigarette paper in my hat. The wind is blowing all over the place, and somehow, with no small degree of we'd just call it a miracle. It was a miracle. The Rizzler never actually got wet. So I've stood up. I've managed to light this cigarette despite the wind. But then as I've done so, the wind started to die down. As the wind started to die down, I looked up at the sky and I noticed the rain was starting to disappear. And as I looked into the distance in the sky, I could see the storm clouds, big, grey, as Jurassic as they can possibly get, just creeping away into the distance. And at that point, I've smiled to myself. The sun's come out, I've turned around, I've grabbed my bag, and I've started to walk down towards Avebury. But then as I'm walking down towards Avebury, I've looked behind me, and there's 3 rainbows lighting up the sky. It was later that year, I did the same walk again, heading down to Avebury for a summer solstice, where I had what was possibly the most magical experience I've ever had down at Avebury on a summer solstice. But this next poem, which is called The Bard, it puts it in poetic terms, maybe so much more accurately. There was a lot of thoughts, a lot of emotions swimming through my mind, some connected to old connections I managed to reconnect with, lonely moments just walking along, but all inspired by that landscape around Avebury in Wiltshire. As the rain it falls upon my face, and the wind it blows with violent grace. His feet they wade through grass and mud, a rainbow paints the sky above. His feet they ache where miles pass, the poet there upon his path. A weary sight to travelled bards, those stones stood tall, those earthly shards. As the drums they bang and gypsies dance, the wanderer he stops to glance at life found singing all around beside those stones amongst the downs, which find him in this time and place where sun and moon they change the face of journeys made for aching bones. The sun sets on those sacred stones as the lone wolf barks beneath the stars, and the owl gazes from afar where the fox he creeps by in the night. The wisest men they tread so light, As the stones which mark this swine-pressed turf, they guide you from the ridge's mirth into a world where magic bounds the weary poet walking down. As the sun, it rises blinding eyes which wandered far beneath these skies. The bard declares he lives and dies. The bard he sees with open eyes. ...2020 for most people was probably quite a challenging time for myself. I was quite lucky. Having kind of hit me the way it did at the time, I was walking along the south coast of England. Call it the Jurassic Coast, and they probably call it that for a good reason if ever you've taken the time to walk along those coastlines. But there was this one point when I'd come away from the coast, was a bit more inland, and I'd arrived in a small town called Wareham. And it was this one particular day, I've gone into the local Sainsbury's to get some foodstuffs to continue with my walk. By this point, I'd been walking, must have been somewhere approaching a week. And all of a sudden, I realised, like most people were realising at this point, that the shelves in the shops were empty. What then followed was a bit of a panic, but then a mad rush to get somewhere where I could be safe from all the madness and not have to mix in too much human company. The end result of that effort was that I ended up in Devon in the Blackdown Hills, where what followed was what can only really be described as perhaps one of the most spiritually uplifting times of my life. Essentially, I just sat in the woods for 4 months. I cooked my food on the fire. I went to sleep by the fire. I walked down into the local village on an almost daily basis to pick up supplies, and on my wanderings, even bumped into a local beekeeper who nothing but his own sheer generosity and friendliness really kind of kept me supplied in honey for the entire 4 months. So all in, it was quite good. But that leads on to this poem, because this particular poem, I don't know, I was sat there at the time, and it was this bombardment of experiences. Being in the forest in the spring, it's kind of like this patchwork of colours. You've got the bluebells, as the bluebells are dying back. You've got the foxgloves starting to come into play. There's wild garlic everywhere. There's swarms of bees flying all over the place, and it's hard in such a place, in such a moment, especially when you've got the time that I had at that point, not to be inspired by it. I can think of, I don't know, very few points in my life where I've simply had the time to just sit still and be. And I don't know, those 4 months by that fire, where they most definitely inspired this poem in a way that very few times in my life could have done. The birds sing in the midday sun for those who choose to find their fun in places built to last with time, the test of much more than a rhyme. The garlic wafts by with the breeze where forest grows with swarms of bees, which passes by as if one mind set loose to dance beneath the sky. The bells, they spread in shades of blue beneath my feet, their scattered hue, a feast for wandered human eyes, which wandered far and travelled wide. To gaze upon this red-tinged mud, as plans they vanish with the luck which Lady Fate unwraps for me right where I sit amongst the trees. I gaze once more into her eyes and ask once more just what this time should bring her back to meet with me where I sit happy in the breeze. She smiles bright like I might know and tells me life as was this flow. It bangs the drums surrounding me to lead these most road-weary feet. To shake my head it might unnerve the lady come to haunt my hearth, stood there alive, fixed in her eyes the look of a next-level sight, which cannot help see into me, a smile fixed to lead the free of spirit through the drifts of time with nothing much more than a rhyme. Unfortunately, that is all we have time for now, but if you keep checking back, you will be sure to find more, along with news on the upcoming book release.